Okay, that's good. So here with Davide, and because many of you have asked how models in NethServer 8 work, so we'd like to deep dive into this topic and show how to install apps from existing containers like Dockers and other kind of containers. So today is really interesting because we'd like to discuss with Davide. So Davide has prepared a session. After his talk, we can have a question and answer. So you can use the chat on the right, asking your question, and Davide is going to answer and show you some technology. Davide, do you want to start with your? You have a slide, right? There's some slides, so you can start with run any service on NethServer 8. Enjoy.
Thank you. So I have to run very fast. So fasten your seatbelt because we will fly very fast to see all the contents of this presentation. The point of the presentation is in NethServer 7 to run an application we used to follow CentOS 7 how-tos, and then more or less we follow those how-to. We can make the application work on NethServer 7. How to do the same thing on NethServer 8? In NethServer 8 we don't have the how-to anymore, but we can follow Docker documentation. So applications are distributed in containers, and we can read their container documentation, the application documentation of the container, to understand how to run it on NethServer 8. So what we are going to see is a review of the terms and architecture of the NethServer 8 system. And then we will see some commands to see how to explore a node, what is running on a node. Then we learn how to run a service. We'll make an example for a simple service at first. Then we'll make another example to run a more complex service. And in the end, some notes about how to run backup and restore for our service. This presentation is think for system administrators that cannot find a suitable application in the software center, but want to run a Docker container on NethServer 8. But can be useful also for module developers that just want to give it a try, to try some application and to see it in action on NethServer 8. So let's start with the review of NethServer 8 terms. As you may already know, we have a cluster that is composed by many nodes. So not only one system, but many systems, one or many. One of them is the leader, and we always say we have at least one leader node in the cluster. The other are workers. Inside a node, we have a first layer of the operating system, over which we build the NethServer 8 core. And over the NethServer 8 core, we run module instances. We can run many instances of the same module, or we can run just one instance of a given module. It depends on the module itself. We recently speak about this point in community. If the module conflicts with a fixed port number, for instance, you cannot run multiple instances of the same node, of the same module on the same node. Modules can be modules of applications like DocuWiki or Samba. but can also be modules of the core itself. For instance, we will see traffic. Traffic is the reverse proxy that owns port 80 and 443 and directs HTTP connection to internal HTTP backends. Applications run their containers. Containers, one application can run just one container, as we will see in the simple service case, or can run also multiple containers, as we will see in the complex scenario. Let's explore what's inside a node. The first command I want to introduce is loginCTL list users. That gives us a list of active Unix user sessions. In NethServer 8, I recall that module run as Unix users. Each module runs under a Unix user. In this way, they are isolated from each other. I want to note that the lingering means that the session is started automatically at boot. So in the state column, you see the lingering state. Then what we find in a node? We find agent processes. We find many of the many instances of agent, because each module has its own running agent. It is always started at boot, and the agent purpose is to execute actions and handle events coming from the cluster administrator. We can get a list of agent processes with some grep commands. We can see that in a node, we find an agent for each module, but also we find the agent running as the root user. Those agents running as root are special agents for special context. Specifically, the cluster agent, the node agent, we can find them in every node. And also, we could find also rootful modules, and where we have rootful modules, we will find the respective agent of the rootful module. Of course, these agents are running as root, so they have full privilege over the node. And for this reason, we prefer to run always modules in a rootless mode. What's inside an agent? How an agent runs commands? We can simulate what an agent does with the run agent command. So with the run agent, we can impersonate another module. It more or less what we do with the run user or the su command that are available in traditional distributions. In NethServer 8, we have also a run agent command that actually also runs run user, because what it actually do is, first of all, change the directory, okay, to a directory where the module can store its configuration, and then change the run the command we pass to it as run the command as a different user, and set up environment variables like the agent does. For instance, environment variables can be Redis credentials. If we run a grep Redis over the env output, we can see the credentials used by the module to authenticate with the Redis database. I recall that the Redis database is used by the cluster to store configuration values and to discover other modules. Let's continue our exploration of the node. Now we want to see where are the containers. In a node, we have containers running under the root user, so-called rootful containers. In particular, we have the Redis server that I was speaking about just a minute ago. And we have the fact that they are rootful doesn't mean that they are running as root. Usually, container started by the root user drop privileges. Okay, this is the case of the Redis server. Then we can look at the traffic instance and see what container is it running. If we type a wrong instance name, run agent gives us an error message. I don't remember the correct traffic instance name, so I type again loginCTL list user to see what are the names available. So with the correct name, we can see that inside the traffic1 module, there is a running image, official image of traffic. You can see it from the image URL. If we want to run many commands for the same module, we can start a shell. For example, bash. Inside a module, we can see what are the available systemd service. Systemd does not only start the system services at boot, but as said, it starts also lingering sessions. So each user has its own instance of systemd. If we want to talk with that special user instance of systemd, we have to remember to pass the --user option to the systemctl command. So we can see the list of available service units, and we find again the agent service unit that starts the agent process we have seen before, and also the traffic service unit that runs the container of traffic. If we look at status details of the traffic service, we can see that it is started with a podman run command. We can see it on line 6. And on line 3, you can see that this unit is enabled at boot. Now, let's see how to run a simple service. For this purpose, I prepared a special module image that does nothing. It's just a blank page. We can install with the add module command. At the end of the add module command, we can see the name of the module that is Sketchpad1. Again, with loginCTL, we can see the list of active modules, and we have Sketchpad1 among them. Note that it has its lingering session too. What's inside Sketchpad1 home directory? Let's see it. Just a few files. It's really empty. This special module I created for this webinar is just to run some experiments. And why we need this kind of image? Because the core does some task for us when we instantiate a module. For instance, it creates the Unix user, it configures and starts the agent unit, and prepare the environment to run the command as the module Scratchpad. Okay, for our test, we want to run this container image provided by HashiCorp. Is a simple HTTP server that always respond with the hello world string. What we have to do, as said before, we start by reading the documentation. We go to the Docker image documentation, and we discover, for instance, that this HTTP server is listening by default on port 5678. This is the only important information for our example. So let's enter Scratchpad1 environment. I start a shell, so I can start then run many commands inside it. And then I start on line 2. I launch a podman run command. The important thing is on line 5, I decide to publish the port of the HTTP echo server on port 19,000. Note that the last line is the container ID, that is a long hash. We will find this kind of hashes somewhere else. Some notes about the flags I used in that command. I named my container Hello World. I said I want to replace an existing Hello World container if it already exists. I also specified the detach flag to say Podman that the service has to run in background. And as last, I also passed the publish option where I mapped the port, the listening port. So now we have the Hello World container running in background. We can check it with Podman PS. We can ask, we can send a request to it on port 19,000 and check that it's responding. And now we can make it available to the world by publishing this backend, HTTP backend service on our traffic instance. So we go to the cluster administration interface, we go to the HTTP routes panel, and we define a route. A route based, here I'm creating a route based on the path. So anything that has starts with hello world in the URL path is sent to this backend. In this way, I can, after I save the route, in this way, I can reach the backend of the hello world also from the public internet. This is the name on the first line. You can see the name of my virtual machine. Okay, now we want to make this service run at boot, because by now we just started some processes, but if we reboot the machine, the containers do not start anymore. For this purpose, I want to show you the traditional command that is podman generate. I call it traditional because in latest versions of Podman, we have also other techniques to achieve the same. But in NethServer 8, you will find systemd units, service units, and this podman command helps us to generate the systemd service units that starts our container. So with the running container, I type this podman generate systemd command. I pass some options. I said that I want to generate a unit for the hello world container on line 5. And then the command prints to standard output the contents of the unit. In this case, the unit should be good enough. Note that on line 27, we find again the publish port flag. So to save the unit to a file, I add the F flag. So a file with the container ID is generated in the current working directory. I rename this file to a human readable name and I place it, you can see it on line 9, in a special systemd directory where user units are expecting to be. At the end, on line 11, I send a reload signal to my systemd user session. So the new service unit is loaded inside the systemd runtime configuration. Now that systemd is aware of this new unit, we can enable it to start at boot. And we also start it at the same time by passing the --now flag. Okay, let's check that it is running correctly. You will see also some documentation, notes. We can see that the service is enabled at boot on line 3. And now that we started our simple service, let's see how to start a more complex service. For example, WordPress. I chose WordPress because it requires 2 containers to run. Like I said before, let's look at its documentation. In its official documentation, I found a Docker Compose file. Docker Compose files are just another way to express the command line options of podman run. From this Docker Compose file, I understand that there are 2 services, one named WordPress and the other named DB. The service WordPress binds to port 80, and we can publish this port. We can map this port to whatever port we want. Here in this example is 8080. And this service requires some environment variables to start, as a WordPress volume. And the other service is a MySQL instance that requires some environment variables to start, and has another volume named DB. So with this information, I show you the commands to start this module. Let's create another Sketchpad instance. This time, the instance will be named Sketchpad 2. And let's spawn a bash shell for it. So next commands are all run inside the Sketchpad 2 instance. As we want to run multiple containers that have to communicate with each other, because WordPress wants to talk with MySQL, of course, wants to connect to the database, we have to create a pod. A pod is an empty box that has one or more port published. So we can attach containers to the pod, and they share the same network configuration, and they can see, and from the outside, only the ports that we decide to publish are reachable. So first step is to create the pod. This is the note. They share, containers attached to the same pod share the same private network namespace. Okay, so they are isolated from the rest of the systems and the rest of the world. Only published port are visible. This is the important point. So let's start the first container, that is DB. I copy the Docker Compose options, mapping them to Podman Run, of course. Here, some expertise of Podman Run is needed. I assume you can study it. But the important thing is now to start also the WordPress application. I name it WP app. And note that to attach a container to a pod, I pass the --pod option. So we can recognize the WordPress pod name here. And then let's check that the spawned containers are running with Podman PS as usual. We can see that we have on line 5 the WordPress container that is running with the defined name. There is also the DB name, the DB container. There is also a third container that is an infrastructure container owned by the pod. Here we can see also that published ports are those that we set when we created the pod. And as you can see, each container shares the same setting. So let's check that WordPress is responding. On port 19,001, we get a redirect, and this is a good sign. So let's create a route. This time, in the cluster admin, we will create a domain-based route. So we write the full host name in the host field of the create route form. I enable also let's encrypt certificate request and force the redirect of HTTP request to the TLS connection. Note that the URL of the backend has the port number we used for the Scratchpad 2 instance. And here we have the WordPress instance running. So also in this case, we have to generate systemd units. Now it's a bit more complex. If I call podman generate for a pod, the output is very long because it contains all the units. If I pass the -f flag, a file for each unit is written on the current working directory. We have to edit those files. You will find, for instance, the long hashes of container IDs and the pod. And one thing to do is to manually replace these hashes with meaningful names. As convention, we name service units like the container they run. So we don't make avoid doing too much confusion. Last things I want to show you is how to handle backup of this Scratchpad module. As we have seen, this module has 2 volumes where containers store persistent data. In the developer's doc, it's explained how to configure a module to define what contents are to be included in the backup. So we just create a text file named stateinclude.conf, and we write that we want to include in the backup the WordPress volume and a dump of the MySQL database. Of course, we have to write also the procedure to generate this dump. So to create this kind of scripts, we have to create a couple of executable scripts under the bin directory. For our example, I simply create an empty file, but if you look at the MySQL documentation, you can find the podman exec command to obtain the MySQL dump, or you can also look at existing NethServer 8 modules for the right command. It doesn't matter for our webinar. In the model cleanup state script, we simply remove the dump file. We do the cleanup. Then we can schedule the backup from the backup page. We select the Scratchpad 2 instance, and we run the backup immediately. As we can see in the application log, this is an excerpt of the application log. Inside the backup, we find the contents of the WordPress volume and the MySQL dump file. Then I tried to run the restore procedure, but here I hit a wall because the volume is not restored. This is because our Scratchpad module is empty, does not provide any information to the core about what are the expected volumes we want to restore. So to complete the restore, you have to see how to complete the restore. You have to wait until I will publish the right command to do it. For now, you can be sure that your data has been saved inside the backup. We will see this point maybe in the next webinar. Thank you. Alessio, you are muted.
Okay. Now it should work. Thank you, Davide. Feel free to ask your question here in our chat. So we have already some questions. Davide, do you see them? One question from Christoph on our chat on the right. Are you able to read it?
Yes, I'm opening. Okay, first question. May it be possible to use an agent as a kind of wrapper to list installed modules? May be more convenient instead of listing or running user session within systemctl or login.ctl, as we said. I don't think it is more convenient. The cowboy approach is just to run ls/home. If you want to see the name of rootless modules running on the system, you can just list their home directories. But of course, loginctl is more correct because it displays what is running. Okay,
another question? Feel free to write. So Davide, can I
thank you
answer
for
you?
your compliments.
And so take your time. In the meantime, if you want add something, Davide, want to explain better something?
Well, on community, it were asked to a command to extract single files or directories from a backup. And it is taking some time to do it because we were concentrated on the release. And so I didn't have time to look at it. But I think it is a good question, a good request. So I want to write an helper command to extract backup contents in an easy way. The point is that to run Restic, we have to pass a myriad of environment variables. So the command is very long, and we need to write a wrapper script.
Okay, there are a lot of compliments.
Thank you, guys.
Another question from Lelo. Please read it.
What to expect from community developers? Well, I think you mean...
I read the question. The dev cycle of a module is very different from the server 7 modules. What do you expect on timeframes community devs get on par with the server 8 module development?
The developers has to study a bit Podman. As you have seen in the presentation, there are many things to know about the Podman runtime, the Podman commands. By times, I think we will lower the learning curve that maybe now is a bit steep, but if developers start to make some experiment with containers, I think they will also find easier to obtain software, because in public registries you find everything. So once you enter this new paradigm of the containers software distribution, the software distribution based on containers, you start to appreciate its strength point. Okay, so it pays you back. It's a good investment, in my opinion. So please read the documentation, ask on community. If you start with some experiments and you hit some wall, we can help in the development of modules. It is. I'd also ask Stéphane Delabrousse about this question, because last year, when he started to develop on NethServer 8, or maybe 2 years ago, I don't remember, it was in the same situation. Yeah. So, and when we started to develop NethServer 8, we didn't know anything about containers, so we just studied. I think as community, we can help each other to avoid to require 3 years to learn how to run Podman, but with the example and the documentation, you can start really fast.
But there is another question from Leilo, and he said, NethServer 7 was based on the Smith configuration. It was easy to find parameter stores in the database. The concept of NethServer 8 is very different. So is this now stored elsewhere? Can you explain quickly the frame?
Yes, in a NethServer 8 cluster, we have a Redis instance running as a master database that has both read and write capabilities. Then each node runs a replica, a read-only replica of this master database. This is to allow an isolated node to start services even if it cannot reach the master node. Okay, so for a temporary period of time, we can expect a node cannot reach the leader node of the cluster. So the Redis database is replicated. What information is inside the Redis database? Configuration is, we have to distinguish between what we see in the cluster admin page. So settings we do from the cluster admin page, and the settings of each individual application, because each application is very isolated from the rest of the system. It can store configuration as it wants. We often store configuration parameters for a single application inside its environment variables. You have seen the presentation that in the backup, we have an environment file, okay? And also under the state directory of a module, we have an environment file. We often store settings inside that file that is a simple key value file, like Smith was at the beginning, okay? So in NethServer 8, what is similar to NethServer 7 Smith database is the environment file. If you look at it, you will find many information about the application state. Then an application can use also other tools to store its configuration. For instance, Postfix has a small SQLite database, or I don't know, some application wrote JSON files or binary files. I don't know. It depends on the application. So it is important when we develop a module to document how the module actually works. But in the container world, environment variables are the key of the container configuration. So environment is the most important thing.
Elo is asking if there is a thing like config show.
Well, if you know what key to look, you can connect to Redis and dump the Redis keys. In the developer manual, every key is documented. So you can look after a specific setting with a Redis click command. I didn't show that command here because it was not important for the webinar of today.
Another question, talking about environment files, it's asking Christopher, will be there a possibility to have config option of an application running as a Podman service to be exposed with the cluster admin?
Yes, they are, because the environment file is published in Redis. So what the application what we have in the environment file of a module is also available in Redis as a copy. This is a way to obtain some information without entering the context, the run agent, the agent context with the run agent or similar.
Okay. Oh, we have just a few minutes if you want to ask other questions. Feel free to.
Well, this is a first webinar for targeted to system administrators that want to run an application on NethServer 8. The developers have more needs. They probably want to know how to interact with other modules, how to discover services running in a module. But those are topics for another webinar.
Yes, the goal, the aiming is to create some different video session about different topics. This is the first one that our community asked us, so we want to organize this kind of webinar about generic containers. We want to have more people that want to move generic containers from elsewhere to our platform, and we'd like to convert every NethServer 7 modules to a container, to container for NethServer 8. So
of course. Now, our main goal now is to have feature parity with NethServer 7 to start migrations.
But I hope that our community help us to convert the existing additional modules that you can find now on our community, and are developed for NethServer 7 and convert them for the NethServer 8 platform. So I hope that these webinars can help. Other question? Okay, Christoph, thanks. So at the moment, the only way to include an application not yet available from the software center is to manually add it with the shown sketchpad module, right? Afterwards, I may control it from within cluster admin.
Yes, I showed how to run containers in NethServer 8. Cluster admin has not much power over this kind of module because it does not provide its UI. But I didn't test. I can check it now. That we could also. I share my screen again. I hope it does not explode. Okay, this is the machine I created for this webinar. I guess in the software center under install. Okay, we don't have under install. We cannot list Scratchpad in the software center because it is not published in the software center metadata. So you cannot even remove from cluster admin. So apart from configuring HTTP routes and backups, you cannot do so much with the Scratchpad module inside cluster admin. If you want to remove the module, you have to run the command remove module. This is also a bonus slide. I will add it to the slide so you can use it as notes for your experiments. Okay. Remove module is, we have seen add module. There is also command remove module. That's because we cannot do it from the software center. I hope it helps. Thank you. Thank you, Cristo.
Okay. Hello is saying, thanks NethServer for the effort, resources, and dedication. The future of NethServer 8 looks very promising, although emotion as Smith is still present. Okay. So the last question. We have time for the last question. Then we will end the presentation. If you have any question,
Hi, Giacomo.
Okay. If you have any question, you can ask afterward, after this webinar, on our discussion on discourse. So feel free to ask whatever you want there. Okay, I think we have finished. Okay. Do you want to add something, Davide?
I want to say thank you to the whole community for their involvement in the project, and for the help to make it grow. Your feedback is really important.
Absolutely. And if you have any topic that you want we tackle, so any topic that you want in this session online, feel free to ask, feel free to open a new topic, feel free to ask your questions so we can organize another webinar session online with David and Giacomo next time. And so we wanna as we said, we wanna deep dive into the new NethServer 8 stack technology. So feel free to ask, and you will cover. So thank you so much. Good weekend, and let's see you on our community. Bye bye.